Hi, and thank you. As you'll see, this will be a story regarding a data set and a question of interest. It will be more about the data itself than a specific technique. And hopefully there will be some lessons to be learned in regard to data analysis in general. So this is 99% of this work is Pedro Orozco's master's thesis. And the person who posed the question is Pablo Del Monte, a marine biologist who works in Baja California Sur. The topic is extinction. That, as we all know, is the process in which species become extinct. And an interesting fact that I learned due to this interaction is that of all organisms that have ever existed on planet Earth, 99.9% of them are gone, which means that extinction is the fate of every living organism. And I'll be talking about how this is studied through what is called the fossil record, the marine fossil record. Now, this is a topic which has spawned a lot of literature in the scientific literature. There's a lot of biology and ecological questions being asked. There's scientific literature, and this topic has also captured the imagination of the public because it's in the news. There's a lot of talk of that we are currently in what is called the sixth massive extinction on planet Earth, and a lot of people are very alarmed by this fact. So it's in the newspapers, it's in TV shows for the general public. Now, all of this which I'm going to talk about today is based on what is called the fossil record. So I will explain this is a compilation of data. I'll describe briefly what it means. This is like the standard, this is the standard database that is used for all these assertions being made in the news and in scientific papers. Now, what is it? There's 35,000 records which are of this form. There is the name of an organism, and then there's 2 dates associated to each one, which is the date, the geological date in which its fossil is first recorded, and then the last one when the last time it's been recorded. So these are the green circle is when it appears, the red circle is when it's last seen in geological time. That spans an important variable which we will call the duration or the lifetime of that particular species. So imagine there's 35,800 of such records, and that is what is called the fossil record. This, as I mentioned before, is inventory data. Each one of these is not obtained by randomly sampling the geological areas of planet Earth. This is like an encyclopedia of fossils. That means that there's no notion of an individual date of this particular record being recorded, because this really represents all specimens which have been recorded are captured into this, inserted into this encyclopedia. So we don't even know how many of these were found in order to establish these 2 dates. There's all sorts of problems which I won't address today. For example, many of them we only know what geological era, but we don't have a measure in millions of years ago. So that implies censoring, because geological eras are a range of dates. And then another thing we don't have is georeferences. There's no notion of where this was found. Because again, this particular record could be constructed by several hundreds or maybe 2 or 3 fossils that had been found in the world. So that is the fossil record. If I collect these 35,000 plus blue lines and show them all together so you can have an idea of what they look like. So these are these blue lines plotted, but the height at which the line is plotted is to denote how often that particular range appears in the data set. So for instance, this one here appears quite often. There are many labels that go from this to this era, whereas most of them are concentrated down below. This is a zoom just so you can see a bit better what it looks like. So this is the fossil record. The scale is millions of years ago. And based on this data set, there are very many assertions being made, and I'll show you the type of things. One of the main points I wish to show you towards the end is that if you have data, it doesn't necessarily mean you have information regarding your question of interest. Now, most biologists in the literature seem to assume implicitly that what you're observing in the fossil record is what there was on planet Earth. In other words, that observed data is equivalent to studying extinction. And I will make you think twice about if this assumption is correct. This is a type of plots which you can find in the New York Times, for example. So move along the time scale in millions of years ago, and at any given time, look at how many of those blue lines are alive at that moment, and take an average. No, not an average. This is biodiversity. So this is how many blue lines are present at any given time. So I count, I move time, and I count how many of those blue lines are present at any one time. That is what's called species richness or biodiversity. And this is what an actual plot of that data looks like. And this is where people look at big dips like this one here or this one here and speak of the notion of massive extinctions because richness suddenly went down. This is the same notion of plot, but those are the 5 recognized massive extinctions in the Earth's history. This is the one of the dinosaurs, the most recent one. And there's a lot of talk as to if we are currently in the 6th, and moreover, that is being caused by humans. It's important to realize that humans have been present in this picture about this much of time. Okay, right here. And there have been 5 massive extinctions when humans weren't even around. And this is where a lot of the debate comes. This same type of time-wise plot, that what is plotted is not richness, but some measure of extinction rate. There are many ways of measuring that. For example, if I simply count how many went extinct by how many there were present at that time. That gives me some measure of the force in which extinction was happening. And again, if I plot that, you see these sudden peaks, which correspond with the notion of massive extinction. If I make histograms of where the green and the red circles appear, in other words, what is the distribution of a new species appearing or a new species disappearing, I get this sort of thing. And again, you have peaks, which red is extinction, so these are the massive extinctions, because there was a mode that happened, a very frequent disappearance at that time. This is what I said before. If I fix time and average the lengths of the durations at any given time, if all the blue lines that are present at a given time, average the lengths. So this is what is the mean duration or lifetime. And this is typical of what is done. But as statisticians, we all realize that the mean is only part of the story. So we're interested in what is the distribution of lifetimes for a given time, not only the mean. And the reason is that if we understand the distribution of lifetimes, we have a very natural way of studying extinction rates, which is called the hazard function from reliability and survival theory. So what Pedro did was to investigate what the distribution of these lifetimes were at different times. And sometimes this is what happened. So for example, 300 million years ago, this is what a typical fossil would have been present for. This is the sort of distribution which one might have expected. It's like exponential, Weibull, that sort of distributions typically used for describing lifetimes. But what Pedro and I found is that sometimes you get very strange looking distributions for the durations. Bimodal behavior such as this. This was a big mystery which Pedro and I were trying to understand, is why are there seem to be, when the statistician sees a bimodal density, one immediately thinks of mixtures. So Pedro spent about 2 months or 3 months thinking about if some kind of mixture could explain why we have these bimodal behaviors. And to make the story short, mixture wasn't a good explanation for this. So we came up with the following explanation of how data is being produced. Okay, this animation was done by Pedro. I'm using it here to illustrate what is the fossil record in terms of the data that is being actually produced. So this is the tree of life. This is what biologists want to learn about. Fossilization is a geological phenomenon because it's, first of all, not all organisms produce fossils. And even if they typically do, it could be that they don't because the conditions weren't right. The minerals weren't there or the water wasn't there. So sometimes it's good for fossils and sometimes it's bad for fossils. Some of these have soft tissue that don't even produce fossils, because the only ones we see are the ones that have some sort of structure that survives. So some of these produce fossils and some don't. Furthermore, humans have searched for fossils at different rates in different periods. For example, it could be that humans have searched recent geological areas, whereas very little has been searched for in deeper geological areas. The point here is that humans also participate in the data production because they search for fossils, and they might search at different rates depending on what time period. Now, there's a lot of, I'll skip through this, there's actually genetics going on, but there's no genetics data. We can't tell if a fossil is related genetically to any other. So we don't have that information. So the only thing that we observe, the data fossil of all of this that I've pictured, the fossil record is this. It's a few species which happen to produce fossils and which happen to be found by humans which were searching. So it's an accident of two things. It's a biological process and it's a human searching process. And that is what the fossil record contains. So Pedro and I began thinking about how can we explain what was happening in this sequence of slides. So we have a probability distribution for the durations. That is what they want to investigate. That is where the rate resides. However, there are several processes for life. They agree that there's not only a single tree, that it might have been several. So we're actually mixing a lot of durations in the fossil record. So we have a model for mixing the durations of individual trees at any given time. And then the human comes in and searches for fossils. And we can presume that the probability of finding a fossil is not the same. In fact, it might depend on its duration itself. A fossil which was present for a long time has a larger probability of being seen by humans today than one that was very short-lived. Maybe we haven't had the sufficient luck to find a fossil of its kind. So we conceive that there is the act of finding or not finding a fossil, and what the database really contains is a sample of conditional durations given that they've been seen by humans. But that's not what we're interested in. We're interested in the distribution of X regardless of if I've found it or not. So this shows that these two processes, the biology and the human search, are combining. And they're producing a model for observed data, which is called H. And it depends on the two things. It depends on what the biology dictates and what the human searching has produced. And it's the combination of those two things which produces the fossil record I have shown you. This in the literature is called encountered data or a mixture model. And just to illustrate, we'll show you a very simple example. Suppose that the lifetimes are in reality exponential, that they're mixed with a log normal, and that the detection probability is an S-shaped function. which simply says the longer it lived, the greater probability it had of being found. And this is a sort of H density that one can find. So you can see that the bimodality is explained by this notion of encountered sampling instead of a mixture. That up there is the illustration for a detection probability. This simply is saying someone who lived only 100 million years had a very small probability of being found as a fossil, whereas one that was there for 500 million years or more had an almost sure probability of being found. Now there's many modeling questions that remain open. Is what are selection for the densities that participate here, or the detection function? Furthermore, how do they depend on T? And then this detection probability contains things that have to do with geology or with climate. So I think there's several scientific disciplines that could have a saying or have proxy data that would help establish what the probability of a fossil being formed was for a given geological era. And then there's also human sampling issues in this detection probability. So let me show you very briefly. In ecology, the notion of sampling effort is something well known, and in other problems is well established. This is an example of this is the number of new species discovered by human effort as a function of time. So this is simply how many new have we discovered as a function of time. You can see World War I, World War II, to signify that in wartime, humans are not busy looking for biological species. So this is a good proxy of what sampling effort is for the search of current species, not fossils. These are current species. This is another example in where the notion of sampling effort is used. The number of person hours which have been set out to capture butterflies is a measure of effort. That tells me how much I've tried to look for butterflies. What we need here is some proxy which would tell us with what intensity these different geological eras have been searched for or have been sampled. For example, it could be that recent periods have been sampled much more than very old periods. And this black curve, the point is that it influences the distribution of data, and it confounds the notion of extinction, which is the first question asked. So why would we want to do this? In order to quantify uncertainty of all these assertions being made in the news and in scientific papers. If data is insufficient or non-reliable, it would be best to know about it because it would perhaps dictate where further data is needed. And to finish, 35,000 records is by no means big data in the sense that was mentioned in the earlier talk. However, I do think that there's an important notion here. That data is not a synonym for information. The question at hand here is confounded because of sampling effort, at least. And even if I had 35 million fossil records, it would not draw a way of going around that notion, is that the question of interest is confounded. So I think the thing to be learned is that even if it's big data, it could not be big information. It could not be relevant information about the question being asked. Thank you.